Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. This is my favorite part when you introduce the Stoa, by the way.
Oh, I'm introducing it?
Yeah.
Okay. Just because I like to do variations on the theme. I feel like the weather lady, you know, they put those women up and they're supposed to be doing weather, but they really have like a shtick they're supposed to do. This is the archetype that I'm channeling. Okay, so welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a place to cohere or discohere in dialogue or debate or argument at times around what matters most at this knife edge, razor blade road of the moment. Should you wish to continue, please stay on the line. Okay, my friends, I missed you last week. Sorry, I had a class. It was a very large class, and last month when I had the class, I made them wait. So I felt that I would be excommunicated from that group if I didn't arrive on time last week. So, but what I did is I really enjoyed watching the video, and I took notes of all your questions, and I got very enthusiastic about looking at these questions and looking at them as a whole. So once again, your presence last week without me was a gift to me, and I thought it would be fun to look at these questions and go deep, but also play with them, some of them. Some of them are very deep. Some of them I thought we could play with. And I wanted to start with Peter's question, but I wanted to invite you all to help out in a certain way. So if you have pen and paper, just jot down some notes so you can do shares. And Peter's question was how to be strong enough to live a full life. Now, when I read your questions, if they don't sound relevant in the way you said it last week, you can go ahead and ask it in a different way. But I tried to transcribe it pretty faithfully. Okay, so Peter asked this question, how to be strong enough to live a full life? And if we're doing something like collective insight practice or looking at semantic primes, what do the words mean, or mental models, the stuff we've been doing, or Cohen work, we were doing some Cohen work. If you look at a question like this, most people would be attracted or be interested in, well, what is a full life? But I want to hone in on this word strong. I think the strong, I mean, obviously they're coupled together. He's got a mental model of a full life and what is it to be strong? So this word strong is very interesting to me. And what I would like the group to do for Peter is to create a list of strong like what? I could say, for example, strong like an ox, right? Or strong like or tornado, or strong like steel. And let's see how many we can get in 5 minutes, and then we'll share, and people will you know, there'll be some redundancy, so just keep going until all the things that you've thought of have been said. And the question is how to be strong enough to live a full life. Strong like what? Use some powerful metaphors here. Yeah, you could put it in the chat too. We can read them from the chat. Good idea. Okay, one more, let's do 45 more seconds. This is beautiful. Ah, tardigrades. Okay, so let's let Peter reflect on this first go round.
So what I was noticing is that the words that I probably would resonate with, say in the past, like mountain or lion or thunder, just wasn't landing for me. It was sort of the more unusual ones. Let's see, like ants or sunlight. Um, yeah, a deliberate choice. Change. Yeah, and then I just started just witnessing the words come in after that.
Does anybody want to talk a little bit about some of their, one of their words that really kind of held a lot of meaning for them when you thought about it? Speak that to Peter.
Yeah, so yeah, the strong light change was one that came for me. And from that thing, you know, change is the only constant, and it's this thing that perseveres, even though we think of often think of strength as like this unmoving thing, but actually, yeah, this thing that perseveres throughout all. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that because for me, it was like, you know, you hear strong like, you know, a tree blowing in the wind, it's responding to change. But you said strong like the change itself, like the force of the mover, the force of the movement itself versus being strong enough to follow the movement. You close that gap with just putting it like that, which that was cool.
Hello. Mine that was really resonating was a warrior, which I realize is maybe a little cliche. I'm just constantly fascinated by Navy SEALs and Spartans and Vikings, and I'm often puzzled at how drawn I am to like solar energy, but I'm very lunar, so maybe I'm just always looking for the complement.
Mm-hmm.
Not wondering about my femininity, but like masculinity is like wow. But as I was watching the things come through, like mycelial web, like, oh my God, yes. And just all the subtleties. So it was really lovely receiving from everyone because I was kind of stuck on my usual fascination and to get present to like strength is not about the physicality. There's an essence running through all these strong things that I won't be able to articulate really right now, but really opening me up to where I can find more strength in my experience.
Yeah, and so you're saying that we could turn that around on itself. So if you think of all those different types of strengths, they're themselves a mycelial web, right? That are all interpenetrating all these strengths. You know, all these strengths are available because they already exist. They exist in the universe. I mean, they're not you know, like strong like a unicorn, you could have said. Well, this is more of a fantasy, right, or a metaphor, but these are things we pointed out that actually exist. They're, yeah. Any other share?
Yeah.
I was no. Oh, go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, someone put a 2-year-old's will to say no. I don't know who that was, but
I think Daniel.
yeah. And I laughed, and I also, there's feel like there's something more there. Like, I wrote an impulse that aligns, and I feel like, yeah, that if there's something that, you know, that 2-year-old, you know, they're saying no, but they're saying yes to something. There's something they're drawn to. There's something that makes sense to them. Yeah, and I just, you know, like you feel they dig their heels in for a reason. There's a really good reason. Something really strong. Yeah.
Narian?
Yeah, I noticed I was sort of like oscillating as I was reading each one of these. There was kind of like a rock, paper, scissors going on in my head, thinking, oh yeah, this is totally strong. Except that this thing seems stronger in relation to this one. Oh, but then there's this thing that's stronger in relation. And so I was sort of like picking up on, there seemed to be something about things that are able to affect change, like strong things would affect the world very strongly. And then there was another sense in which some of the strong things were just strong because they resisted change.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was reading through all the words, I was like, does this affect the change or is this resistant to a change? And in relation to each other, which one is stronger? Is there going to be a change or is there not going to be a change?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes. Yeah, that makes me think of like, it's not a question of quantity. Strength is not a question of quantity. I want to get stronger. It's a question of skillful means. I need to be strong like in this context. And then it doesn't require effort or building. It requires picking, and you know, I don't need to be a stronger pair of scissors and to beat the rock. I need to be strong like paper. And this notion of this fluidity of skillful means rather than quantity. So, yeah, Susan?
I mean, that, yeah, the essence of the movement. I mean, what you're saying, that the perseverance, and, you know, what struck me about the oscillation, you know, where oscillation can work both ways, to your point, is that, you know, are we oscillating, and maybe in the contrasting that with being stuck.
Mm-hmm. So mine that came up to me when I was watching your question last week was a kind of a favorite of mine. And that is the octopus, you know, like the octopus lives under like 500,000, whatever, some, you know, barometric pressure of huge amounts. I forget what the unit of measurement is there. And, you know, we build these crafts, these diving crafts and these suits and stuff that have to withstand all that pressure. But how does the octopus withstand all that pressure, all that water pressure? It's water in water, right? Water can't be compressed in water. And it's kind of that way of matching matching the environment you're in, or Yeah, strong like what? And I think people, humans, we have pretty much as a culture a very limited toolkit of strong like what, you know? It's always like, let's build a bomb. Let's like build bigger machines to go through the, you know, let's create anti-viral thing to, you know, what's the proper like strength for COVID virus? This is an interesting question. It's probably not the kind of strong we talk about. So I just really loved the question because it really brought out that inquiry. Did you want to comment before we move on?
Yeah, I like that. Because what I got, what I'm taking away from that is like, you know, there's a strength in saying no, and there's a strength in saying yes to change, you know, things that happen to you. And I had a bias towards the no, you know, like the mountain, the lion, the thing that can resist something. And so it put some light onto that bias I had.
Any last comments? Something has energy for you? Yes.
I'm still ruminating on it a bit. I put one strong like an orgasm, and I think about orgasms generally being pleasurable and mysterious and can be overtaking and cause relaxation. And yeah, there's something about the coming in and going out, coming in and going out, that and the mind bending aspect of it that can change people's perceptions of what they want for their lives.
Yeah, so for me, that really tied into this notion, the other part of the question of the fulfilled life, you know, in when you said strong like orgasm, it's like this, the way I relate to it is continually building the pressure or the tension to see just, you know, it's almost like, you know, I think the French word for orgasm means little death, like really pushing the, constantly building up the strength. How much can you contain? And for me, that had a lot to do with the word fulfill, like keep filling and filling and filling and filling and filling and filling until the strength expresses itself. It goes from tension to strength. So that was really tantric kind of imagery for me. Oh, it's interesting, because then I just switched to a male perspective. Yeah, it's interesting. So strong like orgasm, when I switched to a male perspective, really shifted. It's interesting.
Can you say more about that?
Well, like from the female perspective is, you know, it's just like being able to absorb more and more and more and more and more and more. And for the male perspective, I don't know. I can only have a projection really of the male perspective. But part of it is, could be that, you know, that also be part of that kind of movement. But it also could be, this is such a projection. Okay, so I think that's involved. I mean, I think that's obvious from the male perspective, but like I don't have a penis, so But I would imagine in my kind of imagination, it's different. It's kind of like instead of being able to absorb more and more, it's like almost like not being able to tolerate that. You know, these words aren't easy because I don't have the firsthand experience, but it's almost like, yeah, if somebody can help me out here. Yeah, drive versus absorption, or like they feed off of each other, you know? The more you can absorb, the more, yeah. I don't have a lot of words, you know, the felt sense shifted for me. And like I said, I can't really, yeah, I have to get into more of a projection or empathic projection to think of it from the other side.
And I'll just add in from a genderqueer perspective, thinking about all the different kinds of orgasms that I have. Like, there are some, like yesterday I was listening to two friends talk and connect on a really deep level, and it was just like waves of pleasure through my body. Mm-hmm. And also like the relating that I have with plants sometimes. And I really liked what you said about the building up and how much more can you contain, how much more can you contain. And it feels like that, like walking down the street smelling roses, mm-hmm. and then another, and then there's another, and then there's another, and there's this building of the capacity for appreciation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a funny image. I'm going to spoil all the heat here, but there's this like video series like about different kinds of strange love, like people love machines and stuff. And it's quite often that men will marry or partner with really fat women and they become their feeders. It's kind of like a projection of that. You know, they feed and feed and feed. And have you seen those? It's really quite odd. And the men have the women on strict routines and they want to get up to like 800 or 900 pounds, but it's kind of like displacement of that same kind of the feeders. Yeah, the archetypal of those. It's interesting. I just thought about it. It's not pleasant, but okay. Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's fun talking about orgasms because now it's got me thinking.
Oh, cool.
I did this exploration where, because I can have multiples, and I think the most I've ever had in a row just by myself was like 8, maybe. And I really started looking at it. I was totally detached from any kind of sexuality in a way. There was nothing about the opposite sex. And I just kept looking at that like peak moment and like, what is it? What is it doing to my body? And it was just like a little bell I could hit, maybe like the very center of some kind of fractal spiral. So I did some meditating on that, and it was, I was just abstinent as far as interacting with others for 4 years recently, and I started having my orgasms to the image of a swirling purple galaxy. Like I couldn't get enough of this like star cluster, and I would experiment sort of midway. I'd be like, well, let's throw like some male genitalia in here. Let's get some human action in here, and it would just completely it would all fall apart, and I would be totally turned off. But I would get back to that galaxy, and so, I mean, it's a bigger discussion maybe, but there's something about the orgasm that almost isn't sexual. It is. I can make it sexual, but there's something just so primal about it that transcends all of the form identity that I have. So I just wonder. I've never said that to anyone, so I wanted to.
Yeah, no, I mean, we remember we were talking about, I don't know if you were in the early, we were talking about the affects, and then we left lust aside. When we're really young, we can't regulate our own affects like fear and seeking and stuff, and we need a primary caregiver. Then we go off to school, we have peer groups. They're not going to help us with our anxiety. We learn to regulate our own affects. And it's the same with lust. When we first are learning, we need a dyad in general. but you can regulate your own orgasmic system or experience it or follow its rhythm or catalyze it without another person. This is quite clear. And you don't even have to do it by touching yourself. Imaginative tantra is really powerful, and I think that's what you're calling. You're talking about. And so, yeah, I actually think, like you said, the more imaginative, the more space, the more, you know, people used to call it muse. You're visited by a muse because, like, what's happening on the other side. Yeah, so then the question is, what are orgasms for? You know, is I think maybe some of what you're meditating on, like what's happening, why is that evolved in us? You know, and it's also true for other animals. You see male and female cats, especially when they're sleeping and dreaming, and they're like, what the hell is going on? What's going on there? You know. So it turns out that this is, yeah, another thing that's seamless with the continuity of life. You know, in the Qigong, we call it the microcosmic orbit. These energies are building up between you, the heaven and the earth, and in your body. So there's still heaven and earth. There's still masculine and feminine principle, but the orbit's happening this way versus that way. Peter, did you want to comment on that? This is your question.
No comments are coming up.
Yeah, so this is good. This is just a little way of showing how that these questions, you know, when they're asked authentically, they're like little portals into all kinds of things. Okay, can we move on? Should we move on? So is Donna here? Asked, oh, is this Donna? Did you ask, I didn't put down your last name. So how do we measure communitas in digital space?
Yes, that was my question.
Okay. This was a really interesting question. And so I wanted to back down and say, how do we measure communitas in originally? Like, how do we and then ask, how do we measure it in digital space? Now, I actually had a little download answer in this question that I thought I would share, but then open it up to discussion, because I actually have done research in this with Dave Snowden's Sensemaking technology. You know, you design a scan and then you see the results on high school students. And we've adapted it for communities that are doing collaborative housing, mutual stakeholding, property building, and stuff like that. And it turns out that if you want to think of it as the protocols that code for communitas, there's three major ones, and that's belonging, voice, and meaning. We showed with the research, and I'll get to what those are, but we showed with the research that people that had higher or more complex understanding or ways of belonging, voice, and meaning reported larger kin group size, how many people that they felt intimate with, who they could share intimacy with. So it turns out these three things actually are correlated to how, you know, like your Dunbar number, let's say, right? So if you made meaning, if these things were not complex, we call them 1 deep, 2 deep, and 3 deep. you would report having one or two or no close friends. And if they were complex, you would report having more than 10, let's say. So, and what we mean by these is meaning is basically in this group, am I able to participate with what matters most to me? Like, it doesn't matter to me. Do the things we do, do the things we talk about, are they relevant to what matters most to me? You know, sometimes we participate in groups and we're happy to do that because we're accompanying our mother, but what's really going on is like bingo, it doesn't really matter to me. So meaning is all about whether the interactions, the engagement, the participation is what matters to you. And that could be trivial, it's not trivial. Like some people, like baseball and soccer and football really matter to you. So it's not a highfalutin thing. It's very context, relative to the context you're in. So, so that's one leg of building communitas. The second thing is, and you see this across all different levels, you know, if you have like cheerleaders or high school kids or girls that are really into makeup and stuff and dresses and shopping, it doesn't matter if it's, you know, what form it takes. It just matters if the participation and the engagement and how you spend your time is what matters most to you. The second thing is voice. Are you always given a turn to say what you have to say when you want to say it? Do you feel like you can never get in or something? So how much voice do you have? So not only can you take your turn, but does what you say change the direction or the choices? So it has to be coupled to consequences. And the third thing in voice is, can you say something without feeling like you shouldn't say it when you're a minority position? So those are the three ways you can get in terms of voice, what we call voice. So meaning and voice. And the third one is belonging. And belonging is a little harder to describe because it's different than identity, like, or affiliation. And what belonging means has to do with a specific self-other relationship in the group. Do I feel that I am in the group, both I'm in the group and the group is in me? Like that the group is a manifestation of me and I'm a manifestation of a group. So we try to get to this notion of if someone just feels like I'm in the group, well, that's a lower level of belonging. But if they feel like the group is nothing without me too, you know, then this is kind of the interpenetration. So these are the three protocols for communitas that we have shown are correlated. They're not causal, but they're correlated to how large a kin group you have. So I suspect that they might be transferable to the digital space. It's just that how we make sure, like I think turn taking is hard in the digital space because you can't, like, we have two screens here. You can't, sometimes I don't even know someone starts talking and I don't really know who's talking. And in regular participatory space, it's quite clear. You can, you know, you can feel this person hasn't said anything, but you can't feel any energy. But then in real space, you feel like this person, you can like sense it and you're like, I don't know, something wants to come up here. I find that very difficult. Yeah, that study is not available right now. It's owned by, it's a work that I did for a foundation. So it's going on to a much larger scale with these community building, and if it holds true for that, then we'll probably publish a white paper. One of the problems is it's Dave Snowden's work, and it has to be very statistically robust. So as opposed to like my work, I don't care. I just throw it out there, see what people think. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So can you contrast that to sense making? I'm assuming that meaning making and sense making is two different things.
Yeah, they're two different things. So sense making is kind of a collective activity. So you all kind of understand each other, and you're using language that is translatable, and you have theories of change or theories of models of what's happening that you all agree with. You're following the same map. You've made sense of your shared experience. You can share a lot of meaning with someone. Like, let's say you're a partner and you have children, right? So you're always engaged in like, what school are they going to go to and this or that. And like, when you're engaged with them, it means a lot to you. But maybe your partner wants them to go to public school because they don't want them to be like elitist, and you want them to go to Montessori because you want them to be like a new human. And so you're engaged in what matters most to you, but you can't come to any like sense make. You can't make, it's very difficult to make sense around these two points of view because it depends upon your theory of the human, your theory of culture, your theory of the state of the world. So the sense making is breaking down, even as people are trying, they're working on very meaningful participation with each other. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. In fact, it kind of brings a question to mind: is why they didn't choose sense making?
Oh, because the study was to try to figure out what correlated with kin group size. And that's an interesting question. At what point does I can say that how is it? I can't remember, so I'm not going to say it. But the question is, does the erosion of sense making break down your kin group size? What's the correlation with that? That's interesting. You know, one of the reasons why we were doing this is to make a case that you can ground kinship. I believe, and we didn't further this study, but I believe that the assumption that people have to be able to make sense together to feel like they belong together is a very, very modern thing. When I was growing up, I mean, your friends were who was around, and you didn't like test the semantic, you know, like we're all hung up on words, you know, I don't want to use this word and that word, and we're constantly trying to make sense in these kind of completely identical ways in order to feel like we belong. This certainly did not exist before the linguistic turn, where words and semantic sliding and all this mattered more. So this is actually research to, you know, David Graeber, who wrote Debt. He's an anarchist. He's like, he really, I forget which book, but, you know, he's like, it's ridiculous to think that you have to have shared values and shared models of reality to get along. You know, that's not appealing. It's not consistent with the human condition. So I think it's one of the reasons why I don't engage in the media space on the war on sense making. I think the war on sense making is amplifying the war on sense making. If you say, you know, words are weaponized, well, you've just weaponized the word, and there's yeah. So this is probably not true in other cultures, right? Yeah, you can't understand. You can travel other cultures, you can't understand, and you can laugh. You know, you can't understand why the family relations are the way they are, and the food they eat, and the crazy things you do. But because you have let go of, you know, because the gap is so wide, no one expects you to understand. And therefore, you can touch base with how you can ground each other. And somehow, you know, our whole late modern, postmodern, or deficient modern world is everything is about the words and the models and the getting it right, and the information we share. And there's an illusion that things held together in the past because we all agreed on the same thing. In the past, we didn't know that nobody actually thought what you thought, you know. The diversity of human experience is underrated, and the need for people to, yeah. So, and then there's other cool things about sense making. You could, I put a little bit of it in my article on the side view. People that study sense making, like Carl Weick, it turns out it's different than we think of it. All sense making is retrospective sense making, and they and in my article I tell the story of this Hungarian. It's funny because they're Hungarian. They're the new Polish joke, right? So this Hungarian military squad that was in Switzerland doing, you know, these military exercises, and they were sent out into the Alps, and they got caught in a freak snowstorm, like happens sometimes, and they got lost from a whiteout, and they were 3 days, and they were panicking, and they didn't know how to find their way back, and they thought they were going to die because they were unprepared for that kind of weather. And on the third day, they found their way back to camp, and the lieutenant who had sent them out was, how did you get back? And they said, well, we thought we were dead, but on the third day, this other guy found an old map he had in his pocket. And that's how we were able to find our way home. And they give him the map, and it turned out the map wasn't a map of the Alps. It was the map of the Pyrenees. Oh shit, what time is it? Hold on. And so sense making is a ritual thing we do. It's not actually rational. And now I have to run for 5 minutes because I told him I was on a call until 11, and he was supposed to come at 11:15, and he's here now already. But if you bear with me, I can get him started. I'd like to do one more question before we end, but I'll be right back. Sorry.
So while she's gone, yeah, I'd like to kind of throw it out there that, you know, what showed up for me was one, I think that we're all kind of coming together because we're seeking to understand, versus, you know, the communities that are seeking, or people who are seeking to get along. And what kind of, you know, showed up for me was, you know, wow, you know, that's kind of where, you know, society is shifting away from being that authoritarian leader who, you know, we don't really question them. We just kind of all go along with it. And, you know, and then we kind of seek into this, you know, well, we just have to get along. So if we, you know, we don't want to cause conflict. So is that, you know, resonating with anybody else?
I think that getting along part gets to the context of my question. There's a choice that we have to be here. And, if this, for example, the Stoa, if this, what we talk about here, if this seems relevant, then I can participate and I can experience belonging here. I can have a voice here, but I can also leave. And in a physical community, there is no leaving. And it doesn't matter if you get along or not, you are still part of the life of a community. And so my question is around that, and I'm not exactly, I'm just exploring it. I don't really know how to ask it in a really articulate way, but there's something about a physical community where that life extends. The life is, you can sense your interconnected part of it that's beyond choice. And then in a digital community, choice is very important. And how far does this interconnectedness extend? And how deep does it reach in each of us? And how do we measure that? And can we hope to experience that interpenetrating, indissoluble connection that we have with each other in digital space when we have the choice to leave?
So is for you in this context, do you see any distinction between choice and commitment?
Well, if I make a choice to join a physical community, there's a lot of choices that I say no to. When I commit to live there and be a part of a physical group of people, I'm kind of, I've kind of cut off a lot of choices. Like, well, I used up all my money. I quit my job. I'm now a part of this. I'm totally invested in the life of this community. But there's still a lot of choices available to me in a digital space that I don't have to, cut off or say no to just to be a part of a digital space. So how deep is that level of community and communitas? Even though we experience communitas, how deep, really deep is that level of commitment to each other? It's a good, I like the way you pose that question.
Yeah, I'll add to this. Thank you, Donna. I feel like the digital community is still not very well understood in some ways. So things that we took for granted with physical community, like proximity, like you're talking about when you join a community physically, you can't leave in a way. I mean, you can leave, but you'd have to physically leave. So, things like meaning and voice and belonging, all of those seem like they are not limited by the physical space, but it makes me wonder what the effect of proximity and physicality is and like how that translates to the digital world. And I have kind of a weird analogy came to mind, which is, cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin is forcing us to understand money in a new way because it's money that's decoupled from the traditional mediums of exchange, the physicality of that. And so in a way, we have the same challenge of understanding community decoupled from physical proximity.
And would you say that the value of, to use that analogy, the value of Bitcoin is somewhat of the collective commitment? It's based on people staying in.
Yeah, that makes sense. There has to be some kind of social consensus for any sense-making system to hold up.
Yeah.
But curious what other people think, or if there's any other thoughts floating around.
I feel that most of the very original thoughts and ideas come completely out of social consensus. They're completely contrarian, and they require invention of a new word and even terminology altogether.
If I can riff on that, I might suggest that to be contrary, you have to have some consensus to be responding to or reacting against. So maybe there's a dialectic relationship there.
Yeah, I feel like there's a default assumption, right? At least based on my deep dive in investing world, there's a default assumption that contrarianism is sort of taking the opposite stance, but that is something that appears from the outside. I often find that from the inside, when you're thinking purely independently and you come up with an insight, it might be aligned or it might be opposed to the consensus. And that when it is opposed to the consensus, from the outside, it looks as contrarian. But from the inside, the person has conceptualized a new model of reality in a way.
Yeah, there's this fascinating article on, I can't remember where it came, it's not Aeon or Quillette, but maybe I could find it. Someone posted it. And they talk about sheep, and they say the difference between sheep and wolves. And I liked it because it kind of reframed. And she said, sheep, they don't follow the leader. They don't have a social structure where there's a leader. What they do is they follow each other. They're more like a swarm of locusts. So you have all these, like, if this one next to me moves that way, I move that way, and then this one moves that way, they flock, right? So they don't actually have a social system where you follow anything like one leader. So they're not like that kind of social system. They care what everybody else thinks, what everybody else does. They're always adjudicating like the next relationship. And she was saying this was actually the way we are sheep today. We actually don't do what President Trump tells us to do, but some momentum gains, and then we are afraid of being ostracized. And then little by little, the thing conforms based upon this logic of social cohesion. But she says, unlike wolves, they don't just obey a leader. They're all leaders, and the leadership is constantly, it's very sophisticated social relationship between roles and leaderships, and debating. You know, if you see dogs, one wants to go here and the other wants to go there, and there's like debates, and there's a lot more going on. It's not just authoritarianism. There's not just the alpha dog. And so I think in our modern society, I think we're more like sheep in that sense that she said. You know, I mean, whole things happen in our culture because people just are unconscious. They don't like follow anything. They actually don't have consensus. They just kind of move like like these small actions. If you ask people why they do things, there's no consciousness behind it. I think it's more like just kind of bodies in space moving with other bodies in space. You walk into an environment, you'll notice your body starts moving like other people's bodies, and you intuitively start picking up the social cues and you start replicating them. This is all unconscious, very unconscious. You may feel like you're doing sense making, but I think it's really something more organic than that. And so what I think the role of the contrarian is to break that habit, is to like, you know, wake people up. What choice are you making here? And I'll give you a really extreme example. I shouldn't say this, but my mother will never see this. You know, my mother was born in a very rural area in Maine. Maine is still very backwards. She grew up in a one-room schoolhouse. They didn't have running water until she was 13. And she really wanted out of there. So she got a job punching holes in, like, the original computers were key punch holes. And they put her up in a women's boarding school, and she met my father and got married a month later. And not until her wedding night did she realize she had a vagina. So like, and then she had kids, and all this stuff happened to her without her ever agreeing to anything, really. I mean, I asked her, like, why'd you get married? And she's like, I don't know. Like so much of the world, a lot can happen. You can grow up, go to school, get a job, have kids, you know, be kind of unhappy, and then have grandchildren and go to the force of your life. You can live whole lives and never consent to anything. Unfortunately, this is true for many, 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 many people. This is like Gurdjieff was, you know, so unhappy. Why people buy the products they do, why they argue that this product is better than another product, you know, maybe we're a select group. We have to recognize this in ourselves. But it's really true if you look at it, that the mass consciousness is not, doesn't have a lot. It's not that rational. It's not that well thought out. And to finish the story in the Carl Weick book, when Carl Weick told a CEO of the company this story, he said, it would have been really impressive if the guy who had the map of the Pyrenees knew it was the wrong map. He said, because that's what running a company is like. He's like, you don't know what you're doing, but if you can rally around something that people buy into, then you can move them as a unit. So these things, most people live a completely unexamined life. And even the way we tend to relate to the War and Sensemaking series has more of this quality to it. Okay, this is kind of viral and popular, and other people, this is why the internet works. Other people, you know, I mean, we're all, you know, I want to look at things that other people look at. I had a conversation with Mom today. You know, she's very, very high risk. She's older, and she's had pneumonia every flu season, very high risk of COVID. And she's been pretty good about, you know, she used to go to church every day, work at the first Mass, and she stopped doing that. And so now she's like, oh, I went to the store. Now everybody's, you know, everybody's out and about and driving. And I'm like, exactly, this is exactly the time you don't go out, you know? It's like more dangerous now than it was when we had the lockdown. It's just common sense, you know? Now, I said, now's the time you don't go out. Don't, you know, now cut back even more, because the action logics is ridiculous. But most people are like, okay, you know, and they don't examine this. We have low numbers because we had lockdown. The low numbers doesn't mean it's safe to go out. So now we're all going to go out, and we all know this. The internet knows this, and the CDC knows this. Now we're going to have this big, huge spike. So now's the time not to go out. But of course, everybody's going to go out. And we have this like rolling swarm kind of behavior, and people are not making sense out of it. And that's kind of like who we are, I think, more than can we all get together and make sense of things. I think that's kind of a hyper rational fixation or obsession today. The question more is, given who we are, then where's the leverage points for growth or waking people up? Yeah, so that was a great question. She had to go, Susan, but it was a great question asking how did Sensemaking fit into this Sensemaking survey around belonging, meaning, and voice. And Donna, that, yeah, that was your question. Very generative. Very generative. Do we want to do one more question and just kind of seed it? Maybe it's a big question, and maybe we could start with it tomorrow, next time. We'll go over, I'll give you my 5 minutes back. So Ray, the third question was from Ray. And that this is a very deep question. That's why I wanted to get to it. And the question was, how do I keep living as simply as possible without ignoring the suffering of others? And one of the things, I mean, I know Ray, so I kind of know a little more the context of this, but the way I wanted to speak to it is when we work with, and by we, I mean people who teach consciousness or awakening or done meditation practices, when the question of the suffering of others comes up, the first move is always from the conceptual, the image, to the lived experience, right? So always, this is the move embodied practitioners always make. And the question in this question is, where does the suffering arise? Where's the suffering arising? So when you're not ignoring the suffering of others, where's the suffering arising in your lived experience? When you see, you know, there's something that really gets me on the internet, and it's these, they have trigger warnings. You see, I don't even know if they're real. They seem so unacceptable to me, but you see like these Chinese people barbecuing live dogs, right? And if I'm honest right then, there's this toggle. It seems like the suffering is arising in the dog, right? But if I go with my experience, and I'm really honest, the suffering's arising in me. It's the only place it can come. It's very tricky. I'm not saying that at some point a dog didn't suffer, but in my lived experience of the suffering of others, what do I first notice, to be honest, is the suffering is arising in me. And that's the only place you can work with it. Now, that didn't answer the question, but I think in your question was, you know, why am I not out there chasing this problem? And your job is to eliminate the amount of suffering that arises. So now you have a koan. If the suffering arises in me, and my job is to eliminate the amount of suffering that arises, and that's the only place I can work with it, that's the redirect. And it's not a simple answer, and it's not solvable probably by 99.999% of the people in the world, or if anyone. But that's the move. It's why the Dalai Lama just walks around the world and laughs, you know. Or Thich Nhat Hanh, he does incredible work in the world, but he just starts from himself, and he tells people to get more sleep when they're worried about the suffering of others. Well, you should get more sleep, he says. So these are the paradoxes, but it's when you start with experience, you have to realize that, yes, it seems like, and yes, that is a trigger for the suffering that arises in you, but where does the suffering arise? It arises in you. And that's where you have to work with it. So hopefully that's helpful. and speaks to your question.
Very much so. Very much so. Thanks, Bonnie.
Okay, here's my weather lady coming on. The Stoa is run by a gift economy. Your presence here, and I truly mean it, is already a gift. But if you wish to add some more giving to the system, you can do that at the Stoa website. And I think it's been modified or updated so it's easier to do. And I want to thank all of you. And it's the stoa.ca/gift. And I want to thank all of you, especially Peter, for being the thing that makes it happen.
Thank you, Bonnita.
Have a good day.